Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of our RUPES Core Series webinar, which is our continuous online RUPES education program. And we appreciate your time and appreciate that you've logged in. There will be people logging in for the next few minutes, but we will go ahead and start. I want to remind you that on your screen, there are several boxes, and you can move those boxes around. You can increase and decrease the size, so you can actually shape your screen to your preferences. So you can, like I said, you can increase and decrease the size and move those around. The boxes that we have, we've got the PowerPoint slides, we have on camera our presenters, we have the presenter bios, you have a question and answer box, and you also have a resource box that you can download material. With us, we're live here. I am Jason Rose from RUPES, and we are live from Denver, Colorado in the United States. We are also live from Milan, Italy, and say hello, Fabrizio.
Hello everybody.
And then in the background, we have producing and controlling the background functions. We've got Samantha there in Italy, and we appreciate all the work she does. So also wanted to remind you that these are recorded webinar series, and those of you that registered, if you're here, then you registered. You can, after the presentation, you can view this presentation again. You will be sent a link. These will also be uploaded onto the RUPES YouTube channels, so you'll be able to see this again. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. We get a lot of questions on these webinars, so we can't answer all of them, but we will hopefully answer your question, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. So with that, I want to begin our topic. And this particular webinar series topic, as you know, we do these monthly. This particular month, we are doing the topic of our BigFoot Mille Gear-Driven polishing system. So this is a deeper dive into that product and that system. Those of you that were on our previous webinar, you received the overview of all of our polishing systems. But this particular topic goes in a little bit deeper into the gear-driven Mille system. The topic that we're going to present has a lot of material, so we're going to try and go at a pretty good fast pace. But remember, you can actually watch us again another time. But the topic's going to lay out like this. We will have an introduction of the basic features of the tool, the components of the system, and about the gear-driven movement itself. Then we'll move into basic techniques, and these are basically how do you use the system in a basic sort of a way. Then we will go deeper into technique, more of advanced techniques, and how to get the best performance from the RUPES Mille gear-driven system. Part of that, finally, at the end, will include techniques for doing what we call edge work, and curves and contours, which we will explain when we get there. So for that, we will kick this over the pond to Italy, and Fabrizio can begin on his side.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you for introducing the webinar. Thank you for being here. It's the middle of the night in the US, so we appreciate your presence here today. A couple of things also from my side before I start. The first is, please give us a couple of feedbacks on the quality of the video, of the audio. If you have any problems, please. We don't hear the webinar, so you are the people that can give us some feedbacks from the quality point of view. Second thing, if you have questions, Jason told you there's a Q&A box. You can write the questions. We'll receive them a couple of minutes later than you write them. So please do it as soon as you have questions. Then at the end, we will select those that we want to answer and that we believe them to be more interesting for everybody. So I will introduce the gear-driven polisher. So what is a gear-driven polisher, and why should I choose this instead of the other two kinds? You all are aware about the presence of three basic movements on the polishing: rotary, gear-driven, and random orbital. So why should I choose a gear-driven polisher? Let's see what is the best feature of this kind of polisher. The first is it's very easy. It's debatable, but some of us believe this kind of polisher to be the easiest to learn, even though some other people believe that the random orbital is even easier than this. It's a good balance. Many people say it's in the middle between a rotary and a random orbital, which is partially true, and it's the perfect balance between correction power, because the dominant movement is the rotation, and safety, because anyway we have this orbit and the low number of rotations per minute that makes this tool much safer than a rotary tool. And also the orbit, which is not as huge as a random orbital polisher, but it's medium, normally between 5, 8, 9 millimeters, makes it more suitable for different kind of panel shapes and sizes. So also for narrow spaces, for contours, for curves, it is very, very suggested and recommended. Is it safe? It is much safer than a rotary, by far, because a rotary normally rotates at 1,000, 1,500 rounds per minute, or rotations per minute. Gear-driven is normally between 500 and 600, so it's slower than a rotary. But anyway, we still have some potential. Sorry, I went up too fast. Let me go back one slide. No, it doesn't work. Samantha, thank you for helping me on this. Okay, one more. Okay, so the movement can create hologram effect. It is a predictable movement. It is a movement that that has a geometrical background, not as easy as a rotary, but anyway predictable, so it can create holograms. Many times we might need a second step to take out minor defects that we can create with the first very invasive step done with hard sponge or with wool pads. It can create some heating on the paint more than a random orbital, so this creates a swelling of the paint, and when we go back, some defects can come back. There is a higher risk. The dominant movement is a rotary, so there can be some burn through, especially on the edges, or when we have thin paint, we might experience some problems, but much less than with the rotary tool. Then let's see, we have system. You know, RUPES since a few years decided to move from a tool producer to a system producer. We don't produce only the tool, we produce here also foam pads, we produce here also compounds. The Mille compounds have been the first to be produced in-house by RUPES, so we have a complete system. This is given by, has been designed to get the best possible results, the best possible user experience, and to make it easy to use for everybody. We have our color coordinated system, we will see it today, but this gives you the best possible performances from our tool. It is a system, so we have the tool designed and made in Italy or in US, the backing plate, which is made in Italy in Vermezzo. We have compounds, pads, everything made here in Vermezzo. So everything has been designed to work in harmony to get the best possible results. The tool itself, we designed it to be the most possible lightweight but balanced. Designed with a good design, with a beautiful shape and design, but also ergonomic, so easy and convenient to use. We have a 900 watt input with a high torque, even if there's low movement typical of the gear-driven polishers. We have a high torque, so high power. Even when you push, even when you apply a lot of pressure on the tool, you anyway get a lot of work done by the Mille polisher. Clockwise rotation, this is important, especially if you are used to do most of the job with the rotary. All the rotary tools, they rotate in a clockwise movement. Some competitors, they have an anti-clockwise movement for the gear-driven polisher. Instead, we produce our own motors inside, in-house, in our factory. So we designed a motor which has a specific movement that gives to the pad a clockwise rotation. So you will get the same feeling that you get when you use a rotary polisher. This is very important. Lowest vibration in its class, very low level, and very good and optimized user experience. Again, some data, 5.2 millimeters is the orbit size. Again, some competitors, they have a bigger orbit. Now, why did RUPES, which is known worldwide as the long throw, the long stroke producer, did only 5 millimeters? Because in this kind of polishers, so the gear-driven polishers, the orbit is not doing the job. Job is done by rotation, by the rotation of the pad. That's the thing that does the job. Orbit is useful only to get a better finish, to get less holograms than with rotary. So what we decided to do was to limit a little bit the orbit in order to get a better user experience, because a wider orbit could create a lot of vibration, a worse user experience. So we decided to have only 5 millimeters, but a little bit higher number of rounds, rotations per minute, which is 535 rotation per minute. Instead, the orbit, the maximum is 7,500 roughly. We have also the possibility to use with the same tool 2 different pads, backing plate 156 inches, 150 millimeters, or 5 inches, 125 millimeters. So you can just change from one to the other. Of course, the bigger pad will give you a better cut, a faster cut. The smaller pad will give you a better finish. That's up to you. You can decide whether to, depending on the job that you have to do, you can change from one to the other. We already said about the clockwise rotation, which is a very important thing. We have 2 possibilities to change the speed of the tool. You can change it with the control dial, which is on top of the tool, but you can use also the progressive trigger, which is best in class. We have a long movement of the trigger, so you can change and control very carefully and very precisely the speed of the tool, just pulling more or less the trigger. And you also have the double rubber support in order to prevent both the surface you're polishing and the tool itself when you pull down the tool from any kind of damage. Pads. We have 3 foam pads, colored with blue, yellow, and white, as usual, our RUPES color code. The thin pad helps to transmit better the movement from the backing plate, from the tool to the surface, and have a better efficiency of the system, and also a higher stability, less vibrations. We have, just like with our random orbital BigFoot system, an open cell, so a reticulated foam that gives the possibility to the air to go inside the foam and cool down the foam itself, and to the compound to flow inside the foam, and always have some fresh compound available on the surface to get the best possible work. If we go and see, the blue is the coarse, as always with RUPES color code. You have the yellow, which is the fine for light defects removal or as a second step, and the white for an ultra finishing job, for a show car, for a perfect kind of finishing, or for delicate paints, very soft on very thin paints, where we want to be very gentle on the surface. The backing plate, as I told you, is produced here in RUPES. It's engineered specifically for the Mille system, for the gear-driven polisher. The engagement has been designed in order to get perfect synchronized movement with the tool and with the pad below. Both plates are included with the tool, so you can decide if you want to use the bigger on the smaller one. Polishing compounds are dedicated, so we do not recommend to use any rotary compound, or even our rotary compound or random orbital compound. We have designed this. You know, temperatures involved, movements involved with this system are different than with the others, so that's why we recommend to have a dedicated, and to buy a dedicated compound specific for a gear-driven polisher. The lubrication has been designed, has been engineered to be perfect with this system. All of them are body shop safe formulas, so you can use safely just close to where you are painting, and the color system is the same as the pad, so we recommend to use blue foam with blue compound, yellow foam, yellow compound, and so on. So this is, again, the Mille compound for coarse and for heavy or moderate stretches, then fine for moderate to fine scratches, and ultrafine for fine defects on soft paint. That's how we recommend to use our compounds. So again, Mille is a system, and we recommend you to use the system with the dedicated, with the most suitable and perfect compounds, pads, and accessories that RUPES produces and sells and distributes all over the world. This said, I go back to Denver, to our facility in Louisville, for Jason for the next chapter of this presentation.
Okay, thank you, Fabrizio. Well done. And what we will talk about now is the basic application of our RUPES Mille Gear-Driven system. We'll talk about, how to apply the product and how the components work. So the very first thing we have to say about any application of all of our polishing systems, but also the Mille Gear-Driven system, is to first do a test spot. We'll explain in detail what that is, but that is always the first step as we begin polishing a car, as we always do a test spot. And then we need to make sure that as we do this car, that the pads that we choose and the pads that we use are properly primed. And we will now show you how to properly prime for this gear-driven movement. And then the basic application techniques, how to apply the product, as well as we will talk about cleaning the pads, which is one important performance feature of this system, as well as all of our polishing systems. And then at the end of this particular segment, we will talk about some basic tips on how to care for the polisher and how to maintain the system for a long time. So before we begin doing anything on the car, we want to get in a comfortable position. We want to be positioned to the paint properly, make sure that all of the items that we need to polish the car are nearby, and the cord is positioned over your shoulder or somewhere that is out of the way of your working on the car, but also safely removed from the paint surface. All right, so we mentioned this test spot, and basically the purpose of this test spot is to actually experience the paint, begin to get feedback from the paint so that we can properly choose the right combination of product and pad and technique to do that particular car. So we want to optimize the combination of the tool, the pad, and the product to get the polishing job done the way that we desire to have it done, and a way that is consistent with the expectations. So the expectations of yourself and of your customer. So the main function of a test spot is really to learn about the hardness, learn about the paint, learn how the paint is responding to your procedure. So you want to make adjustments accordingly. The procedure for doing the test spot is, of course, we want to prime the pads properly first, but then we want to select a pad and compound combination. There are lots of options. As you can see in our polishing systems, we do have different compounds and pads that you can choose from. So you want to choose a combination on your test spot that will help you to begin to optimize whatever that combo is. So the very first recommendation we can make on a test spot is that you choose our yellow combination. So our Mille Fine Polish, as well as the Gear-Driven Fine Polishing Pad, which is also colored yellow. So that is a good combination for a test spot. It's the least aggressive method, and you can begin your test spot that way and make adjustments accordingly. However, one exception to that is if you already know you have a lot of paint defects, you have a lot of defects to polish out in the paint, and the objective is to remove them, then you could also do your test spot with the Mille coarse blue on blue combo, as we call it, the coarse blue foam and the coarse blue compound. And the reason you might do your test spot with that is because based on experience, you probably know you might end up with that combination anyway on most cars and with defects that are severe. So you will complete an application with that combination, whatever the combo that you choose to start with. You will evaluate the results, and then you will make adjustments as needed. If the paint is on the hard side, which as you know, paint is a variable, defects are a variable. So if the paint was on the hard side, we might, after doing our test spot, we may need to adjust to a more aggressive combination of compound and pad. If we removed all the defects very quickly and the paint is on the soft side, and we might have produced perhaps a hologram or a DA haze, that means that our combination might have been too aggressive, and we make the adjustment to go less aggressive in pad or polish choice. And then, of course, if you need to repeatedly apply test spots to dial in the optimal combination, then you can do that. Oftentimes, a test spot is not just one spot, but it's literally 2 or 3 spots until you figure out what that paint likes, what that paint doesn't like, and what is the best performing combination. So then next we'll talk about how to properly prime. And priming pads is a very important step in all of the polishing systems, but there are some differences, and the gear-driven movement means that our priming process is different. Our purpose for this priming is that when you're priming foam pads, which means you're applying product on the foam, and your objective is that you're trying to warm up materials. So you're trying to warm up the foam, you're trying to warm up the compound, and this begins to get the product spreading smoothly over the pad surface as well as the paint surface. Now remember, we're just warming things up. We don't mean to say that we are heating up the paint. We are just warming up materials to get them to flow across the pad surface. Priming fiber pads, and what we mean by fiber pads is wool or microfiber. And in this case, for this system, we are recommending the wool pads and not microfiber, which we'll get into later. But for priming wool pads, there's a bit of a different procedure, but your goal is to begin to warm up materials, and the goal also is to get the compound or polished product to spread evenly on all the fibers of the pad. So an even thin coat of compound throughout all the fibers on the pad. That is the objective of priming the fiber pads. Both cases, your goal is to get things warmed up and to create a thin and even distribution of compound and polish, and to begin having things move around on that pad surface. Also, priming helps to minimize compound sling or splatter, which with the Mille Gear-Driven movement, there is a force rotation, as Fabrizio mentioned earlier. So there is that rotation, but priming the pad properly will help to contain the product and not throw it around. With that, here is our procedure. So our priming procedure goes like this. The very first thing we want to do is adjust the tool speed to speed setting number 2. This is consistent with our priming recommendations on all of our systems, but as you're priming pads, speed 2 on the speed dial. And then next, this is a little bit different than our other systems, but we want to take our polish or compound and we want to put an X pattern, a bead of product on that pad. So why not the dots? Why not a circle? Why not another way? Well, what we've learned with this particular movement of a tool is if we did 4 pea-sized dots, the priming process would be very slow, and it would prime around the middle of the pad, but not around the whole radius of the pad. So by putting an X, this gets a very quick and even distribution across that pad. One of the reasons we do this is with the gear-driven movement, pad drag, what we call pad drag, which is friction and resistance of the pad on the surface. Pad drag is not your friend. It will work against you and against the smoothness of the system. So this priming process is to actually minimize pad drag. After we put our X pattern on the pad, and remember we're talking about priming foam pads here, we will put the pad to paint. Then we will turn the polisher on for about 30 seconds. And during this time, we will apply some light to moderate pressure stationary in one area. What this will do is warm up the foam, warm up the compound. 30 seconds seems to be the right amount of time, and it really begins to warm things up and prime properly. We will repeat this process as needed. For example, it's a very cold day, priming might be a little slower. As you can see on the image on your screen, if we have properly primed, you will begin to see the compound or the polish migrating to other parts of the pad and actually distributing throughout the pad surface. If that distribution is thin and even, then we are good to go on priming. Once we are primed, we will apply the correct amount of compound or polish as what we call a reload. And on a pad this size, it will probably be just a couple of pea-sized dots of product. Larger pads, you might need an additional product. On the screen is an image of the X pattern and relative diameter sizes. As Fabrizio mentioned earlier, the Mille Gear-Driven system has the option for the user to have 2 different pad diameters. And as you prime both of those, you will want to put that X pattern on the foam. So for fiber pads, and again, we're talking about our wool pads, our new DA wool pad. By the way, if you have not used this product yet, I would really recommend you try this because it's fantastic performance and is also very, very good for the gear-driven. It gives you a boost of cut and finish on this tool. So priming wool pads, as usual, we put the tool on setting number 2. Then we will take the compound that we're using and we will apply it to the pad. The actual pattern doesn't matter really. You can put smiley faces, circles, X's, dots, whatever you want. But the important part is that you apply the compound to the pad in a pretty generous fashion. And then you will take what we recommend, the RUPES claw pad tool, and physically spread the compound through all of the fibers. You can use a putty spreader, you can use a hotel card, credit card, something that will physically spread the product around the wool fibers. And this is important that you physically spread it, because if you did dots, if you did an X, it will not migrate properly or as quickly as you want. So this is our procedure for fiber pads. You will put the pad to paint. We will run the tool for 15 seconds, which is less time than what's needed for foam, because we don't need to warm up foam. We just need to make sure we have a thin and even distribution of compound across the fibers. Once you're properly primed with these wool pads, then you can reload with a couple of pea-sized dots or more dots as needed based on the pad diameter. Also based on your climate that day. So the weather, the ambient temperature, the humidity, those things can affect what your reload amount is. So with that, we'll go from priming to basic comments about the application of the Mille Gear-Driven system. Compound use is going to be very important for this system. As Fabrizio mentioned earlier, these compounds and polishes for the Mille system have been very specifically engineered for the movement of this particular tool, the Mille Gear-Driven tool. So we have engineered compounds and pads to get the best performance. And lubrication is one of the important features on this application because of this movement. And as I mentioned earlier, pad drag is not your friend. It doesn't help you. So we try and minimize pad drag in the formula. As you apply compound or polish, be mindful that too much during your application is also not a good thing. We have engineered the lubrication into the product, but if you use an excessive amount, if you over apply the compound, you can over lubricate, and it will affect your performance in a negative way. We also know that if you hose on a lot of compound or polish, if you have an excessive amount of compound or polish, you can waste that product, because with this rotation, you can actually throw that product away, or you'll use too much and it will decrease your cut actually. So the reload amount, pay attention to that. It is usually somewhere between 2 pea-sized dots, or for larger pads, it could be 4. So somewhere between 2 and 4 based on the pad diameter. Also the same with wool pads. So pay attention to the reload amount. Just as a general tip for you folks, what we see generally speaking is detailers tend to use an excessive amount of compound. So we recommend you try less is more. In a lot of cases, you will not need as much to apply as you think you do. So with that,
there's one question. There's one question. Since we are talking about pads, there's someone asking about microfiber pads. Can they be used on gear-driven polisher on the Mille?
Yeah, so we've deliberately at this point in the webinar, thank you Fabrizio for the question, we have been talking about foam pads, priming, and doing a test spot with foam. We have also been talking about our new DA wool pads. We deliberately have not been talking about the microfiber pads that are in our other polishing system, and that is for a very good reason. We do not recommend them for this system. So the RUPES microfiber pads, we don't recommend them for the gear-driven system because they do ramp up temperature and they create a lot of pad drag. And as I mentioned earlier, pad drag is not your friend. So excessive heat builds up temperature very fast, but we don't recommend the microfiber. So when we apply the system, the actual application area that we recommend is roughly about 6 times the diameter of the pad that you're working with. So that will be a general recommendation on the actual application area that you start with. If you have a larger pad, obviously that will be a slightly larger application area based on the diameter of the pad. The other point that we'd like to make on a basic conversation about the application is downward pressure. So you want to have enough pressure with this system to firmly plant the pad on the surface and apply the whole pad surface as needed. But if you want to use pressure as a variable, you can increase the power of this system by putting more pressure down. So this is a lot of movement. There's an orbit, there's a rotation, and if you push down on this tool, it will apply that movement to the paint and it will increase your defect removal rate. But also in the same breath, we have to say that it does have a forced rotation. So as with any forced rotation tools, you want to be careful not to put too much pressure in certain parts of the car, because that will be a risk for damage, as with any rotational product or tool. The next thing is our arm speed. As we apply the Mille Gear-Driven system, arm speed is how fast or how slow we actually move the tool back and forth across the paint surface. So this is a variable, and if you want to adjust your defect removal, you can slow down this arm speed and it will create more movement on the paint and remove more defects. So the section size we have talked about, but the application time is roughly about 45 seconds to 1 minute. And that usually translates to about 6 passes across the paint surface in that application area. If you find that you are doing more than that, if you find that you are taking 2 minutes or 3 minutes for a particular application area, you may want to consider changing up the combination of the pad or the liquid, because that might be too much time on the paint. So to summarize, our basic comments are: always perform a test spot first before doing the whole vehicle. Always prime your pads first so that you can expect the full performance from that pad from the very start. If you don't prime properly, that performance may or may not come later in your applications. Always use the correct amount. It's a balancing act. You can apply too much or not enough. But with this particular Mille system, as we mentioned, the pad drag is not your friend, and the lubrication of the system is very important. Pay attention to your section size as well as the correct speed of the tool. And as we mentioned, pressure is a variable. You can push down to get more defect removal from this system. So as we move through this, I want to talk about from going basic techniques into cleaning pads. Why should we clean pads? Well, probably one of the most important reasons is that as we remove defects, we are removing paint material. And that paint material goes onto the polishing pad surface that we are using. And that one reason alone is worthy of recommending frequent pad cleaning. But there's also compound residue that builds up on the pad. This buildup on the pad will affect your performance. So the paint residue, the compound residue that eventually loads up on the pad surface will decrease your performance. So you will have a tendency to lose cut and lose finish. Another impact is if we are loading the pad with a bunch of material, whether it's paint material or compound, we have now changed the saturation and the weight of that pad, which will increase pad drag and eventually increase the surface temperature in ways that we don't want. Cleaning frequently will help that pad and that compound and the tool do its job better. So your performance will be better the more frequent that you clean the pad. How do we clean the pads? Well, the most effective way for foam pads is really the compressed air to physically push out that paint residue and the polish residue that's on the pad. If you don't have compressed air, another good approach is a nylon bristle pad brush. And RUPES has a pad cleaning tool shown in this picture. It's our claw pad tool, and that can clean foam pads on the fly as you're working on the car. And then also wool to clean, we recommend cleaning that just as frequently. And that recommendation is also with compressed air as the best choice, or a pad brush can also clean wool fibers as well. If you don't have either, you could also take the crevice tool on a vacuum tool, on a vacuum system, and you can actually vacuum the pads and clean the material out. Let me go back to make one point on cleaning pads. We get the question often, how often do we clean pads? What is the frequency? So this is a variable, and the frequency of pad cleaning you can adjust, and that adjustment will impact your performance. Now, a general rule is to say that we really should be cleaning pads every panel on the car. So you'll clean the fender, you'll polish the fender, clean the pad, polish the door, clean the pad. If you're in that habit, that is a very good frequency for pad cleaning. Sometimes based on the climate and the paint and the defects, you might need to clean the pad more frequently than that. But if you are taking one pad and going down the whole side of a car before cleaning it, chances are you are struggling with paint residue and compound residue on that pad. So we really recommend that kind of frequency for cleaning. So with that, we will complete this section by talking about some general tips on how to maintain the tool. This pictured on your screen is a tool rack that is used to hold the tool and store the tool between jobs. You'll see that the cord is wrapped up very tightly, and this is an example of what we recommend you not to do. So although it does tidy up the cord around the tool and it keeps it all in place, it really is not very good for the cord long term. That tight wind will eventually stress the cord. We also recommend that you don't kink the cord or do a severe bend in this area coming out of the cable strain relief out of the tool. This is also not very good for a cord. And we're not talking about just the Mille Gear-Driven tool, any tool. This is a great recommendation that you don't handle the cords this way. Also, when you're removing the cord from an extension cord or from the wall socket, don't pull on the cord. Actually grab the plug and pull it that way, because that constant pulling on the cord will stress the cord. So we recommend using the RUPES cord clip, which we just are launching right now. And you roll the, I'll give you an example. You roll the cord in sort of a large loop like this. And this is the proper way that we recommend to maintain this cord throughout the life of the tool. And it will help that cord to last longer. And don't kink the cord in any place, either close to the tool or close to the plug. And remember, when you're removing that plug, to grab the plug and not the cord. With that, those are some basic comments on how to use the system. We will, at this point, go back to Fabrizio to talk about some more in-depth advanced technique adjustments.
Hello again. I don't know if you see me. Jason, do you see me? Do you see my camera?
No, I see a still image of you.
Still image. Okay. It doesn't matter. The important thing is you can hear me. Okay. We will try to fix this issue now. Let's go with some advanced technique or technique adjustments, as you can see from the title. So why we might need to adjust the technique. There are different reasons why we might need to do that. The first is we want to remove defects faster. We want to increase the speed of our job. Or on the opposite, we want to reduce the heat. Or we want to reduce the removal of material because we are working on edges, on areas where we don't have a lot of material, or we want to have a better finish. Okay, these are the 4 possible reasons why we want to adjust the speed of the technique we're using. 5 techniques, 5 variables are the variables that we can have an influence on. So the first is the tool speed, so the number that I read on the tool. The second is the pressure that I apply on the tool with my hands. The third is the arm speed, so how fast I move the tool on the surface. The pad angle. And application area, the surface that I work on in just one session, in one reload of the compound. We have 3 optional variables. The first is compound or polish amount. The second is pad cleaning. The third is what is called supplemental wetting agent. And we will see what that is. But let's start from compound and polish amount. So why is it important? Because it has an impact on overall performance of the system. So if we use more, if we apply more or less compound, we will change some features, some performances, the behavior of the system. Jason before told you how we suggest to do the priming, how we suggest to do the reload of the compound, but we can change also the amount of compound, and that will change. Why? Because if we have a higher temperature, environmental temperature, or a lower one, the lifetime of the duration, the durability of the compound will change, so we will need more or less lubrication on the pad. The second is we can have different paint type. So again, if we have a softer or harder, we could need to change the amount of compound. Surface temperature, depending on the system we're using, the movement of our tool, the pressure we apply, the technique we use, we will change. We will have a higher or lower surface temperature. We might need more or less compound on the surface. And the last is user comfort. So remember, on one side, more compound will give us more lubrication, so we will go on a softer action, but we will increase also the quantity of abrasive on the surface. So the 2 elements will work one against the other. More compound, more lubrication, more abrasive. So we always have to find the right balance depending on all these elements that we have mentioned in this slide. Sorry, it went back one slide. Okay. No. Oh, yeah. Cleaning pad. Of course, we recommend to clean always very carefully the pad. The way to do it, Jason already said, but it's important to know that we have always to clean the pad, especially if we're using fiber, but also with foam. The first reason is after a job, after 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 panels, the pad tend to be stuck. with debris, with paint residues, so we are polishing not with pad and compound, but with pad and paint. So that's something we don't want to do because we do not control the action we are doing. The second is the cleaner the pad, the better and faster we do the action on the paint. We already said about compressed air. When air is not available, you can use the brush or change the pad. Supplemental wetting agent, this is quite important way to say it. It's a very simple thing. It's just using some water to boost, to notch up the performances that we get from our system. Increasing cutting power. We can reduce compound consumption, so we use a little less product. We extend the buffing cycle, so we work for a bit more time with the same pad, same compound. We help to manage the heating, so we will keep down the temperature. We will improve the finish. It works with any pad, any compound. Almost always we can use it, and it will help us. How should we do it? Very easily. We do our buffing cycle until the end, from the start to the end. When we finish our cycle, then we do nothing. We just lift the tool and leave the compound there. At this time, we can mist a very small one trigger pull of a bottle on the panel without touching anything. We start again doing our job. So we complete our buffing cycle. In this way, the particles of the compound will start again to move, will start again to do the job, but since they are now a little bit more smaller than before, we will be more on the finishing side, but still doing some cutting. So this is a very good way, especially if we are looking for one-step polishing. This is a good method to get it with easier, in an easier way. At the end, of course, we wipe away the residue, any remaining water, and we check what we got at the end of this cycle. But let's go back to the adjusting technique. So we said what we should change if we want a faster defect removal. Tool speed. What tool speed? Of course, we need to go up. We need to increase the speed of the tool. Pressure, it's a good idea to increase the pressure on the tool. How about arm speed? Always when we work with a polisher, the lower the arm speed, the faster will be the defect removal. Of course, we always have to consider that the slower we move, the higher the temperature will grow. So we have to consider that we have to prevent any burning of the paint. Pad angle, more tilt or flatter. More tilt will give you a better cut, a better defect removal. Smaller section size will increase the defect removal. How about compound amount? It varies. I told you, sometimes more compound will give you more lubrication, so less cut, but more compound will give you more abrasives in the cycle, and so more cut. So it depends on the conditions, on the rest of the condition. Pad cleaning often, that's always a constant. The more we clean, the better it works. And supplemental wetting agent, likely, it will help you, especially on long cycle guys. At the middle of the cycle, spraying a little bit of water will help you to get a better cut and a better finish. Reduce heat. How should we move if we want to reduce heat? Of course, we will have to work a little bit in the opposite way. So we will reduce the speed of the tool. We will lift a little bit the pad, the pad and the tool. The arm speed we will need to increase. So we will stress less the paint. Pad angle, more tilt. In this way we will concentrate the action on one area, but for a fewer time. So it will be faster, the action, and it will hit less the paint, and a larger section size, so that the action will be diluted on a bigger area. Compound amount, more lubrication, less heating. Pad cleaning, often. Supplemental wetting agent, of course, we told in the beginning that supplemental wetting agent helps us to manage and to control, to keep temperature of the panel under control. Let's see the next parameter. We want to reduce material removal rate. We are at the exact opposite condition than the first one. So we will need to reduce the tool speed, reduce the pressure, increase the arm speed. Pad angle, it depends. Both can be good to remove, because if we use it more tilt, we will remove more material, but from a smaller size of paint. Instead, flatter will be slower in removing, but on a wider range of area. So it depends. The same with section size, larger or smaller, it depends on the time that we spend on that section size. Compound amount, more. Pad cleaning, often. Supplemental wetting agent, no, because it will increase the removal rate. Let's go to the next one. We are on a second step, or on a last step. We want to we want to have a better finish. What do we have to get? We have to reduce the tool speed. Of course, it will be more gentle on the surface. Reduce the pressure, increase the arm speed, get the pad angle flat so the action will be more gentle, and working on a larger section. Compound amount, more, and this way we have more lubrication, but of course if we are looking for a better finish, we will have a fine compound, so we can add more of that and get a better finish. Pad cleaning, very frequent. I can say the more frequent, always the more frequent, the better, but of course we cannot spend half of our time cleaning the pad. And a supplemental wetting agent, probably not, but again, it might depend on many different parameters and many other elements that are in the system of the pad. This said, from my side, it is everything. I go back to the United States for our last chapter of the presentation.
Thank you, Fabrizio. So we will talk about edge work and curves. What we mean by edge work is the outside 2 inches of every panel on the car. So this is what we mean by edge work, is around the outside edges of a fender, a door, a bonnet of every panel. We are also talking about raised body lines, curves and contours, A-pillars, headlights and mirror housing, door handles, and small and tight areas. So this edge work, as you can see on your screen, it really is that outside edge of every panel, and this is what we mean by edge work. Raised body lines are those areas on the panels where the engineers and the designers have actually changed the shape of the panel and put a raised edge perhaps in the middle of a bonnet. Then the curves and contours, these are could also be convex or concave, but it is a roundness, a curve to the panel. And we're also talking about the A, B, and C pillars. These are the upright pillars around the side windows. And edge work can also be considered the headlights and all the lenses on the vehicle, as well as painted mirror housings. And we're talking about painted door handles, and that area underneath the door handles is a small and tight area that can often be a challenge for detailers to do. So when we talk about edge work and curves, it really is, edge work is all of those areas that we just discussed. And the wonderful thing about the Mille Gear-Driven system is that it actually does edge work very, very well. So that is one of the strengths of the Mille system, is its ability to do these areas on the vehicle. And with edge work, we have to talk about pad diameter, because it's important to note that the options built into the Mille Gear-Driven system allow you to choose between a smaller pad diameter or a larger one, and that choice will definitely impact your performance in general, but also on edge work. So with any tool that has a force rotation as part of its movement, the larger pad diameter that you use, the more aggressive you will be on the edge. And the Edgework for Mille, because of its force rotation, really means that the outside edge of the pad is ideal for doing edge work on the car, because this area is very, very active, a lot of movement on that outside edge of the pad, and the Mille system delivers better edge work for that reason. It's less risky using the Mille gear-driven system compared to rotary on edges because of that offset and the orbit as part of its movement. That sort of mellows out the rotational impact on the paint. We can downsize the pad diameter for easier accessibility and curves and contours. So diameter can help you do some work on the car. As you do edge work, you may need to actually open a door or raise a bonnet, raise a deck lid, actually move the panel away from the car to do this edge work effectively. As far as technique, our adjustments to do the technique, we will reduce tool speed, reduce pressure, and increase our arm speed. And remember, we're talking about edge work around the outside 2 inches of every car. And one of the features of the Mille gear-driven system is we can actually tilt the pad like a rotary and get a lot of edge work done by tilting that pad. We don't include the section size on the slide because the actual area when you're doing edge work is really dependent on the panel and the shape of the panel. So as far as compound, we might add more that lubricates the edge a little more. We definitely will clean pads frequently, and spraying water might actually help you out. So for curves, we're talking about concave and convex shapes to the panel. Technique might be a little bit different. The main point to say on this slide is to actually increase your downward pressure when you're working in concave or convex curves. That additional pressure will help apply the movement. And of course, we can tilt the pad angle and get a little more focus on removing the defects in that curve. For a compound amount, we want more lubrication, so we will add more. And of course, our general recommendation is clean, 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 and then clean again. So with that, to summarize what we've been talking about, the Mille gear-driven system, which is one of our 4 RUPES polishing systems, is a great system that can be tuned to approach user comfort and performance from a different angle than the other polishing systems. And it gives you optimal performance using the system components. So what we've done, as Fabrizio mentioned earlier, is we, as a company, we make each of the components. So we make the tool and we create the motors, we make the backing plate, we make the pads, we make the compound. So all of those things that impact the result on performance, we as a company can validate and control that input into the result. The only thing that we don't control is your technique. And as we are educating you on this webinar, technique is an adjustment of variables. And hopefully you have gotten that point in this webinar. Also, you may need to adjust your technique while you're doing edge work on the car. So again, panels in different areas on the car, we may need to adjust technique, which we have shown you how to do on this webinar. So at this point, we would like to have our producer maybe push to your screen some of the questions. We may not be able to answer all of the questions. And if you're typing in questions now, be reminded that your question won't actually get to us for a couple of minutes. There's a little bit of delay in how this works. But those of you that typed in questions earlier, we already have those. And Fabrizio, are we ready to answer some questions?
Yeah, so far we did not receive, we only received the one about microfibers, so that we already answered to that. Samantha is checking if we have any more. Samantha?
So,
yes, we have. Okay, so she is going to push one. Is there an option to download the PowerPoint presentation? Oh, that's a classical question.
Yes, so the answer to that is yes, of course. You have some choices here. If you want to see this presentation again, you should actually receive an email. If you registered for this and you're on this webinar now, you will get a follow-up email with a link that will take you back to this presentation. The other way is we will later, in a few days, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel and you can see it that way.
Yeah, correct. So this said, I think we can say thank you and bye-bye to everybody from my side and from you, Jason.
Okay. So one thing that we would like to show you here is if you want more additional information about RUPES, about our products, about our education, our programs, these are the touch points on your screen that you can access and engage with us. For our global communications, it's rupes.com. In the North American continent, it's rupesusa.com. And then, of course, our email addresses as well as Facebook addresses and Instagram. So those are the different ways you can engage us as a company. With that, we want to say thank you so much. And we hope that this has been a beneficial program and you have learned some more about our gear-driven Mille system. We tried not to make it a big infomercial about a product and actually educate on how to use it. Fabrizio?
Yep. Thank you, everybody. And see you next time with our core series webinars.
Yes, see you in the next episode. Thank you. Bye.